Hi, guys, and welcome to Charade Inc. I am here with Erik from the Heart Marks podcast, and we're going to be talking about wrestling and some of the strange conspiracies that inhabit this amazing community. Welcome, Erik. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the Heart Marks podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name's Erik. As mentioned, I'm from the Hard Mark Podcast. Basically, the Hard Mark Podcast is a way where I can introduce professional wrestling to a friend of mine that's never seen it before. So I get to kind of relive classic and not so classic moments through the eyes of my co-host, who really doesn't actually care about wrestling at all. But over time, we're kind of getting an outsider's perspective on that. And we also have them rank every match. And so it's really kind of fun to see his opinion on these different things that I hold and cherish so deeply through the wild history of professional wrestling. So a lot of comedy, a little bit of wrestling, but even if you're not a big wrestling fan, I encourage everybody to check it out.
What has been some of his favorite matches?
Oh, gosh. Let's see. According to our highly scientific list, right now, the number one match that we've watched so far, there was a ladder match between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon from WrestleMania 10. That is currently our number one match. He tends to gravitate towards a lot of Japanese wrestling as well. Not that we've watched a ton of those, but those all tend to kind of fall within the top five or so.
Awesome. And can you tell us about how you got into wrestling?
I got into wrestling during the rock and wrestling boom of the 80s. I think a lot of people, over the past however many years have probably fallen under a couple of camps as far as when they've actually gotten interested in wrestling. I know that there was a big swath of people who joined during the Attitude Era. I was in kind of that 80s boom. So my earliest memory of professional wrestling was there was a WWF magazine that had Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior on it, and they're both posing on top of a mountain. And I remember seeing that as a kid and be like, this is amazing. And as a huge He-Man fan growing up, I think that it kind of it scratched that same itch. And pretty much ever since then, I've been a big fan.
Definitely. I'm someone that came into as a 90s baby with the Attitude Era, The Rock, Stone Cold. But I definitely have appreciation for the older generation that really ushered in the mainstream popularity of wrestling and was able to capitalize on that to become arguably bigger stars than your Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Randy Savage wrestlers. What
Sure.
are some of your favorite wrestlers, both past and present?
So as a kid, Hulk was definitely my favorite. I would put Roddy Piper up there too, Bret Hart, Jake the Snake, Macho Man, kind of all those. I was definitely a WWF kid. I didn't watch a whole lot of WCW, NWA stuff back then. Today, current day, I mean, just as a Seattle native, I think I have to say Daniel Bryan or else be excommunicated outside of the state. So that's definitely up there, but I've been following a lot of AEW lately, and Kenny Omega is great. New Japan folks, Will Ospreay, etc.
Definitely. I agree with your list. I would add Undertaker and Shawn Michaels on there for me. I think that one of the good things about, especially the older generation of wrestlers, they're timeless in a lot of ways, where you can get into them and go back and watch their old matches and still have that high level of entertainment. And when you think of the current wrestlers, you see the same trends where you see Kenny Omega having a great match with Okada, four of them. Also, his matches with Naito definitely are high up on my list as well. And I know come 10, 15 years, just like with Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon, we're going to be able to look back on those matches and still have that same high level of appreciation for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that those matches will for sure kind of stand the test of time. There's definitely people that we go back, and as I'm kind of like going with my co-host through the history of pro wrestling, there are certain matches that definitely stand out as ones, like Bret Hart in particular. His matches are always amazing, regardless of what year you're actually watching them in.
Right. And if we look at the flip side of that, what has been the lowest ranked matches?
There was, for no reason whatsoever, and this is something that I've attempted to address to no avail just yet. The lowest ranked match that we have so far is a random match from WCW Nitro with the Steiner brothers versus Harlem Heat. I think my co-host was just expecting a big storyline, and there wasn't one. It was just kind of a throwaway nothing match. And so he's like, "What was that? That was stupid." And so since then, I've tried showing him one of the TNA matches between Jenna Maraska and Queen Charmel. I've tried watching the graveyard match between Vampiro and the Kiss Demon. Nothing has taken that bottom spot
Nothing.
from Steiners versus Harlem Heat.
I think that's so funny because we consider them to both teams to be great and amazing. So it's so weird. But it also comes from, if he has a more casual perspective, he's looking at this like, where's my entertainment? What's
Right.
going on? And the
Exactly.
fact and the fact that that match is still technically below a Queen Charmel match,
Right.
that is very amazing to me. Maybe you got to show him some of those old bra and panties matches. Maybe
Maybe.
that'll be ranked lower. We got to get them higher on the
That's what
list.
I trust me. Kennel from Hell, even that has not been able to beat out Steiners versus Harlem Heat. But I think I just caught him on a bad day. He rewatched it months later, and he was like, "Oh, that was pretty good." And I was like, "You know that you put that last, right?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't know why I did that, but it is what it is. We'll fix it in the months to come, though. I'm sure of it."
So, when you think about the greatest wrestling characters, what are some names that come to mind of current people that could fit that caliber?
Ooh, current. I thought Aleister Black, Tommy End, whatever you want to call him. Aleister Black, I thought was going to be the next Undertaker, like for the WWE. Not necessarily in like that same vein, but sort of like a modern twist on that sort of dark character that people could really grab hold on. I thought that his offense and his moveset in the ring was 100% relatable to people who are more like mixed martial arts enthusiasts. So I thought that Aleister Black was going to be a huge deal in like a WrestleMania main event within the next 5 years, but apparently that's not in the cards from the looks of things.
No,
uh
not currently. And
yeah.
I mean, for me, I thought The Fiend was going to get a lot more universal praise than it has. It seems to be really split where at sometimes people really love the character, they love the direction it's going, and then something happens and people pile on the hate for the character. And I'm like, the character didn't really fundamentally change. It's just people's reactions to it are so split sometimes.
Yeah, it's difficult to have a match with a character like that, especially right now. Because, I mean, if you took the Undertaker character when it first debuted back in 1990 and you tried to put that in, 2021, I don't know that it would have been as successful now as it was back then, just because people were more acclimated to sort of the more cartoon side of pro wrestling. And I think The Fiend, from a character standpoint, like especially when those vignettes first started airing of, it's like a children's playhouse and all that stuff, it was really intriguing and something that like you had never ever seen before in the history of wrestling. But then to translate that into, okay, what is he like in the ring, how does this affect his matches? It's definitely, I remember watching that Hell in a Cell against Seth Rollins where it was just all red lighting, a red cage, and it was just not, from a live perspective, not a great display.
I definitely agree. I think cage matches are always harder because it makes it more difficult to see, especially when you're live. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen a cage match live, and one of the things that I was thinking is, whoa, I'm definitely not getting as much out of this match as I thought I would be. And it was Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, so I know the action was good. It's
Yeah.
just the visual impairment that you have with a cage match. And then you're adding on a red light to that. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I understand for the character you want to create this scene, but
Mm-hmm.
the audience experience is not really there for that.
For sure. And it's very hard for me, like just watching at home, if I'm seeing that the audience is completely just trashing what's happening in the ring, it's hard for me to get emotionally invested in that situation. So I think that there's a combination of that, and then just kind of like his matches, I don't think have set the world on fire. It's been definitely more story heavy in a time where there hasn't been an audience for the most part. And so it's a combination of bad circumstances and maybe some less than stellar production ideas.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. We focus a lot on the male side of wrestling. What are your thoughts on the female wrestling scene?
I mean, I don't. So the WWE, like I follow, AEW, I follow. I don't watch a whole lot of like the Japanese women's stuff or anything like that. But I think just solely from a WWE perspective, like it's really impressive just kind of how many steps and how many advancements there have been made over the past what 5 to 10 years. I mean, really, you can kind of point back there before even the women's revolution, evolution, whatever it is that they're calling it these days. You had like AJ Lee. I think you could point to Natalia as being sort of like one of the first sort of hires that they brought in, where it's not just somebody who's like a model, it's somebody who can actually wrestle. So I think, giving someone like Sasha Banks, Bianca Belair, giving them that platform to kind of main event one of the nights of WrestleMania this year was a really good thing, and something that, I think that they both delivered in that platform too.
Absolutely. And I think one of the good things is it didn't feel like you were missing anything by having them in that spot. I know a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people talk, well, can they actually end the show? Can they actually deliver a performance
Mm-hmm.
that is capable of being a WrestleMania main event? And I would say that they smashed it out of the park. I thought it was a really good match. I thought that the emotion was there, the skill was there. And even if you compared it to some other main events, I definitely think that it was on the higher end if we look back at some of those main events that we've had in the last, 4 or 5 years. I definitely would put it towards the top of the list. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Roman Reigns and his evolution that he has experienced. What are your thoughts on the current tribal chief storyline that's happening with Roman Reigns?
I mean, he has to be the greatest character in professional wrestling right now. I don't know how you could really make much of an argument otherwise. Like, he's so important to that show. I think you could make the argument that he's almost being booked and presented too strongly for what his character actually is. But I understand that they're kind of building up to maybe some potential dream matches with Cena or The Rock down the line. But I think he is owning this so well. I don't know that anyone I think everyone knew that this guy was super talented, but until you saw him matched with Heyman delivering these promos, I don't think people realized just how good he was. And like in the back of my mind, all I can think about is imagine what Cena could have done with a similar sort of character. Like, it just seems like a huge missed opportunity, but I'm so glad that they decided to eventually pivot with Roman, because I think that this run is going to really define his WWE career. That and the Shield run, of course.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. And I'm a big fan of The Shield. And I started to think that that was Roman Reigns' peak. That iteration of him was where his level is. And then he was basically going to be John Cena beta without
Yeah.
the mic skills or, promos to really back it up. And then he came out with this character. And then, like you said, he has Heyman with them. And Heyman always provides a certain level of elevation to people. People always talk about, is that a Heyman guy? Is that a Heyman girl? Because people know when he's attached to it, because he's not going to attach his name to crap. He's not going to attach his name to something that's not going to be generating the highest buzz and actually bringing new people into it. So I'm actually interested to see what happens if and when Brock Lesnar comes back and
Mm.
how those interactions go, because I would love to see the current Roman Reigns have a program with Brock Lesnar.
Absolutely. I think that adds a lot of intrigue. The Paul Heyman sort of, will he make the switch? Does he stick with Roman sort of thing? I think that is just a natural sort of evolution of this storyline. Who knows if that happens, if that's kind of a post WrestleMania thing, because the scuttlebutt seems to be that they're building up towards Rock and Roman Reigns. Who knows if that ends up happening? But even if you do end up pivoting towards Brock, who knows where he's at these days? But I think that would be a really, really interesting way to go. And I could see down the line that be sort of the thing that potentially turns Roman heel, or maybe you go, or turns Roman babyface, I should say, or maybe you go with the babyface Brock Lesnar. I don't know. There's a lot of really interesting ways you could take that.
Absolutely. I think it would be interesting either way. I do wonder how the character would work being a baby face. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the best direction. And babyface Brock Lesnar seems to be the more intriguing path. When he was comedy Brock Lesnar with the boom box and, his interactions with R-Truth, that was just great Brock to me. I love monster, beast incarnate, MMA Brock, but
Yeah.
Brock, when he's just being relaxed, he's enjoying what he's doing, matched up with a heel tribal chief Roman, that has the potential to be one of the best storylines that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited to see. I mean, it's just a matter of time. I can't imagine them leaving that match on the table and not actually delivering on that at some point. It may just, take a little while.
Yeah. And while, I mean, we can talk about current wrestling storylines probably all day, my final question before we jump into the different conspiracies around wrestling is, who do you pick as the more dominant, more effective champion? Kenny Omega or Roman Reigns?
Uh I guess to clarify, right now, today, or like potentially in the future.
Let's do both, but let's start with right now today.
I think right now you probably have to say Roman just because he's absolutely smashed through that SmackDown roster. And I mean, just you look at the main event of night 2 of WrestleMania where he pins both Edge and Daniel Bryan simultaneously, like stacks them on top of each other. Like it's very clear, like this is someone that they are positioning to be like the centerpiece of that company and are protecting him on a level that we haven't seen in quite some time, if at all. So I think right now I'd have to give the edge to Roman. That's taking nothing away from the performances that Omega's had, not even in just AEW, but also in TNA and in Mexico as well. I think one thing that could turn my own opinion around this would be where they go with the belt collector thing, because like if that continues to gain steam, and I think everybody has that hope in their heart of, does this eventually become a New Japan AEW sort of thing? If he added that IWGP title into the mix too, you'd have to say Omega, because then he's literally just combining, not well, he's becoming the champion of all the different companies all around the world. And like, it's impossible to, downplay the importance of something like that. And the fact that it's just never been done to that level before.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. If you think about it, he would have all the major championships aside from WWE,
Mm-hmm.
which makes sense. And I mean, I've always liked Kenny Omega. I definitely think that he took a little while to get accustomed to AEW and the American style, but once he teamed up with Don Callis, this is another example of a manager doing great work.
Mm-hmm.
Once he teamed up with Don Callis, I really think he was able to evolve and build an even better character. And, it's interesting that as we talk about Kenny Omega and Roman Reigns, both of them are in their high spots as they turn heel.
Yeah.
And, the classic wrestling trope of just turn them heel.
Yeah.
If they're stale, just turn them heel.
Right.
They're not really cutting against that stereotype, but I'm glad they're doing it because they're doing great work.
For sure. And you pointed out something really important about both of those too, which is putting them with a manager, with a mouthpiece, not even necessarily because they need a mouthpiece to speak for them, but just because it adds so much to that act, like Don Callis with Omega and Paul Heyman with Roman Reigns. And I think both of those managers add kind of that same sort of sleazy element where like, oh, if down the line you wanted to, once you separate them, that's just an instant sort of babyface turn. You could go a lot of different ways with that storyline. But yeah, a lot of similarities between the two from that standpoint.
Absolutely. And earlier we spoke about some of your favorite wrestlers and you mentioned Hulk Hogan. And so we're going to jump into these wrestling conspiracies. And of course, we're going to start with the conspiracy that Hulk Hogan was beaten up by Randy Savage. And that's why he showed up to his match with the black eye. What?
It's so. I was just reading about this the other day. This is so funny. Okay.
Okay. Now, the truth is, apparently, he had a jet ski accident, and that's why he had the black eye. But I just think it's so much more interesting with everything we know about the relationship of Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, and of course, the late Miss Elizabeth, that Randy Savage would just wallop him a couple times and
Right.
give him that shiner.
Yeah, where do you? So, are you on the side of the jet ski? Is that kind of where you're landing on this conspiracy theory?
I have to provide all the information, but I think I'm on the side of he was beaten up because he said the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time.
Right.
What side do you land on?
I am also on the side of the Randy Savage punched him in the face sort of thing. Just because even as a kid, so I would have been 9 years old when all that happened. Even as a 9 year old kid, I remember watching WrestleMania 9 back, and Macho Man is completely silent on commentary the entire time that Hulk Hogan's wrestling, which was completely out of character for Macho Man to do. But if you watch that match back, just didn't say anything, just totally quiet the whole time. And I remember Jim Cornette, which I mean, Jim Cornette could probably have his own conspiracy episode, if you really wanted to delve into that. But for all of his faults, he doesn't pull any punches when it comes to like giving you his opinion and basically telling you this is what I know to be true. And I believe he more or less said, no, that jet ski thing, that is absolutely false. That was Macho Man hitting Hulk in the face. So I too am on that side of that conspiracy.
Definitely. And this next one is probably a bit more cut and dry, but I thought it was an interesting one to share. And that is the conspiracy theory that Roddy Piper is a murderer, apparently. I didn't know this either. And, it's
Okay.
up for debate.
Okay.
But the theory goes that Rick McGraw was killed in a match with Piper. Now, the truth is that he actually died while the match was being aired, but because the matches were actually taped a week beforehand, he, of course, was alive and well in his match with Piper. But people didn't know that he died. And so when they
Mm-hmm.
saw him wrestle and then hear that he died a little after that, they were like, well, I guess Piper's a murderer. What
I,
do you...
I had not heard of this one before. Do we know like what territory that would have been? That had to have been pre WWF. I'm assuming.
So this was championship wrestling.
Okay. All right. Got it. Yeah, I had not heard of that. It sounds like you more or less just debunked it from the sounds of it. I mean, outside of the Chris Benoit situation, I think the one murderer that pops into my head that you could probably make a case one way or the other for would be Jimmy Snuka, frequent rival of Roddy Piper. But yeah, no, I'd not heard of the Piper thing, but I felt a little bit of panic when you mentioned it, just because I was like, oh my gosh, I love Roddy Piper. If he killed somebody, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of conspiracy theories do this. We're like, wait, am I supposed to be re-examining my thoughts on this person because I do not like this. I don't want this to be associated with him. So when I
Yeah.
read that, I thought it was really interesting because I mean, Piper, God rest his soul, he was not a shy man.
All
By
right.
any stretch of the imagination. But he also wasn't known to be extremely violent or a murderer or anything like that. So I thought it was interesting. And really, it tied into the way information is shared. The fact
Mm-hmm.
that this was the early 80s and this wasn't a super popular person. And if you didn't know it was on tape delay, you're thinking that this guy is fine going into a match live. And then you
Mm-hmm.
hear that, he's dead shortly thereafter. So it definitely was one of the more interesting ones when looking at wrestling conspiracies. But this one might be even stranger
Okay.
somehow. And this is the theory that Rick Rude did not die of heart failure, but actually committed suicide. And I want to make sure I get this right. So, if you don't know, Rick Rude was definitely a very attractive man. He was known to have a great physique and a great look. Um, but he did do steroids, and that definitely was not good. Now, this apparently came from the honky tonk man. So, whatever your opinion is, take that with his grain of salt.
Sure.
But according to him, Ruth's genitals had been amputated after a Viagra incident had gone horribly wrong, and he had to have surgery to remove them. And he was so embarrassed that he lost his manhood that he committed suicide when he returned home from the hospital. And apparently, Jake the Snake backed up this theory that the honky tonk man had about Rick Rude.
Okay. I've heard about the I think I've actually heard this before. It's been a little while. I definitely have heard about the injection of Viagra or whatever it may have been into the penis. It's been a while since I heard that he committed suicide over it. From all indications that I have, it sounds like Rick Rude was like a super big family man. I would find that hard to believe in that case.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And it's just that at this point, we know that he was a heavy steroid user, which definitely contributes a lot to heart
Mm-hmm.
problems later on, even if you've stopped it for a period of time before the heart issues are known to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely agree. I think we can rule this one. People trying to, talk into the image that Rick Rude portrayed, but
Yeah.
I would rule this one debunked. Um,
Yeah, I agree. I remember hearing that he was training for like either a return to the ring or to try and get into mixed martial arts or something. It just, I don't know. I don't think it fits the character of Rick Rude, as although it is fun to speculate. Oh, if Rick Rude lost his penis, maybe he would want to like end things. Like, I don't know. I could see how people would jump to that. Yeah, probably a little bit of a stretch.
Definitely. And this one has to be an even bigger stretch. And sometimes I don't even know how people come up with these conspiracies. I would love to know more about how their brain works. And this one goes is The Undertaker was such a big money draw that Vince had multiple Undertakers ready to go, and that Mark Calloway has only been the Undertaker for about 10 years of the total 30-year time span that the Undertaker has been a character. What is going on with people?
I mean, that I feel like not even necessarily just with The Undertaker, but that's the type of thing that would happen all the time with people speculating. And like, I think that there are cases that you can point to where things like that legitimately did happen with like masked wrestlers and stuff. I remember kind of similar to that, the Ultimate Warrior, like when Ultimate Warrior left and then came back and he was not quite as big, not quite as muscular. Everybody, like all the scuttlebutt on the schoolyards and stuff was like, oh yeah, Ultimate Warrior. The real Ultimate Warrior died. This is a second Ultimate Warrior. So I think for whatever reason, people always want to say if there's been sort of a noticeable change with a human being, especially pre-internet, anything like that, like, oh no, that's a totally different person. They're just hiring different folks. I'm sure Vince would have loved to have capitalized on having multiple Undertakers he could have had at all these different shows at the same time. But yeah, I suspect not.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Mark Holloway, he was 26 when he started. He's about 51, 52 years old now. The changes you see in The Undertaker is the changes you see in a man who is aging and progressing through life. But I just love that theory because it's like, yeah, like you said, Vince would have loved to have multiple Undertakers running around. Love to have, an Undertaker that did the talking and an Undertaker that did the wrestling and an Undertaker that was the locker room leader.
Right.
Just spread them out all across the country. Just imagine he would be an even richer billionaire at this point.
Right.
Um, and why stop with The Undertaker? I would have multiple Rocks, multiple Stone Colds, multiple Ric Flairs, Triple H's, John Cena's, and now Roman Reigns. I would have a whole closet of clones at the headquarters just ready to go.
I think you've got your plan all sorted out. This seems like a license to print money from the sounds of it. The Undertaker
I
one is
mean,
also interesting now that I'm thinking about it because, like, you can very clearly see him like pre-Undertaker in WCW, one of the skyscrapers. Like, there's that footage of him there, and you can clearly tell it's the same guy that showed up in the WWF later. So, like, are we just left to wonder? Was there this middle period where he's just like, I don't want to wrestle anymore, get a new Undertaker, that sort of thing? I don't know. That's funny to speculate about, but yeah, again, I do not think that is the case.
right. And we would be remiss if we didn't bring up Jimmy Snuka again. I know we briefly touched on it. Um, what are your thoughts on that case? Do you think that one, he actually committed the murder? And then the second part of that is, do you think that Vince helped them to cover it up?
Oh, man, see, it's tough. I actually just recently watched the Dark Side of the Ring episode, which for anybody who hasn't seen Dark Side of the Ring, in period, not even just this episode, it's a really great show that kind of delves into some controversial moments in wrestling history, some controversial figures in professional wrestling history, and some controversies that have happened. So definitely something that if you're kind of intrigued by our conversation today, you may want to check out. But based on like what the research that they had done for that episode, the interviews that they conducted in that episode, it definitely seems to hint very strongly that if he did not murder his girlfriend outright, he was absolutely negligent in her care, not reaching out to 911 EMTs sooner than he did, kind of leading to her passing away. So it's fresh in my mind, so it's hard to say objectively, but I mean, I have to say I would think that he probably did, just on account of how many drugs and the amount of cocaine that he seemed to be on, just based on all these different accounts. And as far as the Vince cover up, that is a really intriguing. Oh gosh, I would not be surprised either way. Well, I'll put it like that. Do I absolutely am I positive that it happened? No, but it wouldn't shock me if 1980s Vince, prior to the big national expansion, if he just wanted to take care of that issue and not have it come up anymore. Either way, I could be convinced.
Definitely. I mean, I think of that era of wrestling in a similar way to boxing, where it was not as many rules, and unsavory characters and
Mm-hmm.
their tactics were able to rule the land. And so, while I do lean on the side of Snuka committing the murder, I sort of think, I wouldn't be surprised if Vince did those shady tactics. Did he go as far as actually bribing officials and taking those official actions with the briefcase? I'm not sure, but bribery can work in a host of different ways.
Yeah.
And I remember that there was one witness that, for some reason, from the jump, just backed Snuka.
Mm-hmm.
Any question that you asked him, he backed them. And so that's one form. Does he have incentive to keep Snuka's name in good standing? Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
he getting out of it? That was the question that I really walked away from the Dark Side of the Ring episode with. What are the motivations that are causing people to choose the side that they're choosing?
Yeah, and you're right. I think it was Tonga Kid on the Dark Side episode that was kind of taking up for Snuka, but then also sort of unintentionally also mentioned, "Hey, I was in the car. I never saw anything about her tripping and falling." So it kind of invalidated Snuka's story without him even intending to do. I thought that was very interesting. I think the other big takeaway was the fact that when the police officers did meet up with Vince McMahon and Jimmy Snuka privately, there were no minutes of that meeting, nothing. There's all these other records of all these other meetings, but that one just mysteriously no record of whatsoever. And then the police chief was like, "Oh well, we must not have been an important enough meeting to discuss." And then all the investigations were more or less dropped afterwards. So I think it's one of those situations. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. How many different circumstances that are all these different coincidences can be happening all at once around this one case? It definitely paints the picture that something happened.
Right. I definitely agree with you. And along those same lines, there has been a lot of conspiracy talk around Owen Hart's death and what Vince knew and when he knew it. And I know
Mm.
that the Dark Side of the Ring also went into that. For that, I really err on it being a tragic accident, but definitely welcome your thoughts on it.
No, absolutely. I don't know specifics about sort of the case and everything, but I would find it very, very hard to believe that anyone involved with the WWF, WWE didn't do everything in their power to, address that. Obviously there was some negligence involved in sort of the creation of the stunt and the execution of the stunt and everything like that. But yeah, I highly doubt that there was anything truly malicious that was done, against Owen or in Owen's care afterwards. It just, you could see on everyone's faces after that took place just how devastated everybody was, outside of the fact that like someone had just died in the middle of the arena, but just how beloved of a human being Owen was to everybody.
I definitely agree with that. And do you think that they should have continued the show after that, or do you think it should have been called off?
Oh gosh, that's tough to say. Everybody always goes back to like, what would Owen would have wanted, and that sort of thing. And it's very difficult to kind of make a call in that particular situation. I think if it was today, then yes, you probably do call the show off. Back in like 1998, when you had a bunch of rowdy people out in the stands, like, do you want to risk making this situation even worse by having, and granted, it wouldn't have been everybody, but do you want even that small portion of people causing a problem for you because you didn't deliver on what the end of the show is? To my knowledge, and I could be wrong about this, but the fans at home heard about Owen. The fans in the arena, they knew he had fallen. Obviously, they had seen it, but they didn't know sort of the after effects. They didn't know that he had actually passed away. So I don't. There's a lot of ways it could have taken. I don't know that there's one right answer there, but I do not personally begrudge them for doing what they did.
I agree with you. It's just one of those situations where it's tragic either way.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, you're doing a risk analysis. Like, what is going to happen if we cancel this
Right.
pay-per-view? And you're right. It was just broadcast to the TV audience through Jim Ross. So in the arena, they just know something tragic happened. They know that the paramedics were there.
Mm-hmm.
But, for them, it was, okay, we now have a scuttle, but we're going to move on with the show. And then later on, they found out exactly what was happening. And so I would be really interested to hear from people in the crowd
Yeah.
and how they felt. Like, were they disturbed going on and continuing to watch the show, or were they oblivious to it so it didn't make too much of a difference to them?
I mean, yeah, if I had to speculate, I would have to, because you're so desensitized when watching wrestling to seeing stunts and seeing these guys, do these incredible things to their bodies, and they live to walk another day and to wrestle another day. I think that if I was in the stands and I saw that, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I hope that he's okay. But I probably would assume the best. I wouldn't have jumped to the conclusion that he had passed away if it had been me, again, in that environment, and just, with Mick Foley going off top of Hell in a Cell and like all these crazy things you've seen over the course of time. It just kind of, you're in that mode of thinking where you just kind of assume the best, that, he's not really going to be that hurt. He'll come out of this, that sort of thing. Even though it wasn't a planned stunt in that case, in that scenario.
Absolutely. And, you bring up Mankind, and I think he is a great example of someone that really just mesmerizes people, because you're wondering, like, how can a human body do that? And then you extrapolate that and you put it on other wrestlers, like, oh, well, if Mankind can do it, anyone can do it. And yeah, when you're not there live, you're not really, understanding that you get caught up in the emotions of it.
Yeah.
It's not just you, on your couch or on your bed watching a program. It's you, chatting to the person next to you. Oh my gosh, did you see that? Oh my gosh, this match is coming up. Is that anticipation? So of course, you see something, you're like, oh no, he's fine. Paramedics attended to him. We'll hear an update about him later. And I'm sure several people were waiting for that in the arena, like, oh, okay, we're getting ready to hear an update shortly on how good he's doing, and then we'll see him, the next time on TV. And unfortunately, in this case, that didn't happen.
For sure. Yeah. And there wasn't, and I don't fault anybody, as far as how they handled it, as far as the show aspect of things, just because there wasn't a blueprint for that type of thing. Everybody's just trying to figure it out on the fly. So, you can say a lot of things, and rightfully so, about, why they decided to do that stunt, how it was executed, that sort of thing. But as far as the aftermath of everything, I think they did their best. People in the audience, I can't fault. They weren't just bloodthirsty fans who wanted more. They honestly had no idea. I'm sure the vast majority, if not everybody in that arena, didn't know the severity of things until after they got home.
Absolutely. And to end it on a lighter note relative to our previous discussion, there is a theory going around that CM Punk actually quit the WWE after his pipe bomb interview. And first, let me start with, what were your thoughts on the pipe bomb?
I was super into it. Yeah, I loved it. At the time, I thought it was incredible. I mean, just all the callbacks to things outside of the WWE bubble, which is a little bit more commonplace now, but especially back then when the product seemed to be in very much kind of like a monotonous state, that sort of thing. Like, definitely shook things up. So I loved the pipe bomb promo itself. I loved the match between Punk and John Cena. I thought that the aftermath where Punk was sort of off TV, I think that could have been handled a little bit better. I would have loved to have seen him stay off TV for a couple months and show up in different wrestling companies and do all these different things. Like, that would have been amazing to see. They didn't go that direction, but the promo itself I thought was amazing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that he really started with the Bucks and Kenny Omega do now, where he's basically saying what the fans are saying on wrestling forums.
Mm-hmm.
He basically took those talking points and then said it on live TV, and you're just like, whoa, I I can't believe you're saying this. I can't believe, who's this Dwayne you speak of? We haven't heard
Right.
of this person before. And so I thought that was a really interesting take. What do you think about his exit and all of the theories that go around it, that it was a malicious thing that the WWE did in regards to, quote unquote, firing him on his wedding because
Mm-hmm.
that's when he got the paperwork? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's another situation where it wouldn't shock me if that was a malicious thing. It's entirely possible. I don't know where he himself is landing on that issue at the moment. I don't know if he believes that it was done intentionally, like right now today, or not. But it wouldn't shock me. I mean, the stuff where they released a bunch of people and sent them their gear in trash bags and stuff just kind of serves to show you how petty some people within the WWE can be. I'm sure that this was not a directive from Vince McMahon. Hey, send them their stuff in trash bags. Fire CM Punk on his wedding day. But there are people within that organization who absolutely would do that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the problems with WWE. The bigger you get, the more you have those type of people that infiltrate in different spots.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question becomes, okay, what do we do with them? you know, do
Right.
we let them go and try to replace them? I'm like, well, luckily in this instance they did end up firing the person, but who's replacing him? Who's replacing that experience? Like, what are you doing next? And how are you making sure that that never happens again? Because in the age of social media, you're automatically gonna have people coming at you thinking that Vince um
Mm-hmm.
is from top down giving these really negative directives to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I absolutely believe that there would have been a culture within, if not that just department, but within maybe a larger section of the company that, if not encouraged it, then like didn't necessarily discourage it. So I think you're right. Getting rid of one person doesn't necessarily solve that issue. I guess it's a step in the right direction, but I think there needs to be a bigger cultural change within that organization as a whole, both from the standpoint of, how you're dealing with talent. I mean, just look at the fact that the only major wrestling promotion in the entire world that let go of people during a pandemic was the WWE, while they were also simultaneously making record levels of profit. So it's just, I think that there has to be some sort of checks and balances system in place to avoid these PR disasters of sending people their trash bags with their gear in it, firing someone on their wedding day, that sort of thing. It's just those optics all contribute to the fact that WWE is looked at as more or less the evil empire in wrestling. Like, I'm a fan of WWE, I would consider myself, and I still have a hard time sort of paying them money and like benefiting them, because it's kind of shady business practices a lot of times.
I absolutely agree. And I think that when these things happen, especially continuously, it lends more credence to the type of conspiracy theories that people already have. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're looking at modern day events and you're like, you're allowing people's gears to be sent to them in trash bags, you're allowing people to be fired on their wedding day. Yeah, I believe that you bribed the police. Yeah,
Right.
I believe this and that about you. It's,
Mm-hmm.
it's what you've been doing for 30, 40 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Vince, if you had to kind of paint him with a very broad stroke of like what is his priority, what like drives him as a human being, I think he has this innate sort of drive for the success of the company. I think that the WWE is his child the same way that Shane or Stephanie is. He will do anything in his power to protect that child. And so if you're looking at it from that perspective, I don't think that it in any way excuses any of the things that he does, but I think that it does sort of explain why he has potentially done these things that he's done in the past.
Absolutely. And if you had to give a prediction for some future conspiracies within wrestling, what would those predictions be?
Oh gosh, future conspiracies. Well, I think for anyone who's not familiar with wrestling, I think there's always going to be the conspiracies about fake blood and the trampoline and the ring is a trampoline and stuff like that. So that's always going to be a part of wrestling fandom and sort of outsiders looking in. So like that's never going to go away. I've had many conversations on Hard Mark discouraging that sort of talk, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But outside of that, there's bound to going to be some AEW conspiracies down the line. Like that's going to be the big, I mean, we've already seen it with talk about how all the VPs aren't getting along. Is Cody talking to Kenny? Is Kenny talking to the Bucks? Like all this other stuff. So that's going to absolutely be ripe for further controversies, further conspiracies, and sort of the interaction between WWE and AEW counter program. I mean, NXT versus AEW. Why did WWE choose that day of all days to run NXT when they could have picked any other day of the week? So that is going to be the main sort of cause of these different items in the future, if I had to guess.
Definitely. And I will say that I am excited to read about them because as new generations experience wrestling, their conspiracy theories become even more engaging and more widely spread because they put that on social media. So I want to thank you again, Erik, for joining me today to talk through wrestling and these wrestling conspiracies. Can you let the audience know where to find you?
Yeah, you can find me on all of our social media channels. It's Hard Mark Podcast on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. Give us a follow, shoot us a DM. You can find us there. And pretty much everywhere you listen to your favorite podcast, you can also find Hard Mark Podcast there too.
Awesome. Make sure you go give them a follow. Make sure that you subscribe below to this channel. And we will see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks, Deb.